This is exercise 40. It's the anatomy of the urinary system. As you can see here, the major organs are the kidney, the ureter, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. The kidney is the primary organ for the urinary system. Some of the functions that it does produce the urine. It will remove metabolic waste. It removes toxins from the blood. So it's basically like a filter. It does conserve glucose, water, and essential electrolytes and put that back into the blood. It has an endocrine function in that it does secrete erythropoietin, if you remember from the endocrine system. That does help promote red blood cell production. And it also secretes renin, which plays a role in maintaining normal blood pressure. So with the ability to function and secrete and reabsorb, basically filtering that blood, the kidneys are very important in helping to maintain both the osmotic and the pH balance in the blood. The ileum is the region of the kidney. This is where the renal artery and the renal vein, the nerves and the ureter and lymphatic vessels all are going to have their point of entry or their point of exit from the kidney. So that's where they're all going to connect there. As you can see here, highlighted in the red box up at the upper left corner is the renal ileum, and then the cross section, and then the schematic diagram showing the entries. The adrenal glands are on the superior surface or on top of the kidneys. Remember, you've already studied those. They're the endocrine gland, once again shown here. The kidney itself is surrounded by three layers of connective tissue. The outermost will be the renal fascia. It kind of helps to anchor that kidney into place, into the peritoneum and the abdominal wall, so it's securing it. The middle layer is the fatty layer, which is adipose capsule. It's providing protection. Acting fat often works kind of like a shock absorber. So there's good reasons to have some fat, just not too much. The renal capsule, this is the innermost layer that's attached directly to the kidney surface. It does provide as a protective barrier if there's an infection in the cavity, it prevents it from spreading to the kidneys. And so here you can see the three different layers surrounding that kidney, helping to protect it. If you look at the kidney itself, there are three regions: the renal cortex, which is the outermost, the renal medulla, which is the middle, and then the renal sinus is the innermost layer. Remember, I've often mentioned that when you see cortex and medulla, at least, that always know the cortex is going to be the outer layer. So once again, on this diagram, we have highlighted in the red boxes the outermost, where you have that renal cortex, the renal medulla, and then the renal sinus. We also have in here, we're going to be talking about the renal columns, which are between what are known as the renal pyramids. The renal pyramids are located in the medulla area. This is where the majority of basically the production of the urine is going to occur. This is where that filtration and secretion and reabsorption processes are going to occur. So this is where most of the business of the kidney is occurring, is in this pyramid. As the waste products, which is going to be the urine, as it is being produced, it's going to flow out of the pyramid areas into initially what is called the minor calyx. This is basically the spaces between the columns. And then from there it flows into another open area called the major calyx, and finally into the renal pelvis. All the urine is going to be collecting from all of the different pyramid areas, draining between the columns down into the, once again, first the minor calyx, then the major calyx, then the renal pelvis, and then it's going to leave the kidney by the ureter. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. As we're going to see, you're going to have interaction between different tubules and the capillaries. This is the formation of the urine itself. So this is what a nephron looks like. Part of it is in the renal cortex, part of it is in the renal medulla in those pyramid areas. So the nephron's going to start with what's known as the renal corpuscle, also known as the Bowman's capsule and the glomeralis, that combination. This is where you're going to have filtration occur. Fluid is going to move across membrane from the glomerulus into space. So they look like this little capsule, this little ball. That's what the glomeralis is, with the capsule around it. The glomerular capsule is also known as the Bowman's capsule. This is where this capsule has a huge network of capillaries surrounding it. And so on this diagram, we see the afferent arteriole that is bringing the blood in. The capillary bed is surrounding or is in this glomerulus area, and then the blood leaves out the efferent arteriole. So as the blood comes in, the afferent arteriole passes through the capillaries. A lot of substance will be filtered out of the blood. And then where does this fluid go? It's being collected, this filtrate is being collected in the capsular space. So once again, here's your arterioles. The juxtaglomerular apparatus, there's different groups of cells here. This is where you are going to be forming this tubule after the glomulus, the filtrate that was formed. So the materials that were filtered out of the blood are going to go through this apparatus. It's going to go through this series of tubules. And actually what's going to happen, as you're seeing here, they're going to be interconnected. As you see, they're surrounding that glomulus. So that nephron with the glomulus, as you can see in the red, the blood comes in, goes through the capillaries in the glomulus, and then leaves out of the efferent arteriole. In this corpuscle, in this nephron, this is where you're beginning the production of urine. So you're going to be producing the filtrate here. So what's happened? You are removing just about everything except for protein out of the blood. Protein stays in the blood. If you follow the path around this network of tubules, what happens is first it's going to go through this winding set of tubes that's known as the proximal convoluted tubule. Convolute because it's twisting, proximal because it is closest to that glomeralis. What's going to occur here? You're going to now, depending on the needs right now, not 10 minutes from now, not 20 minutes ago, but right now, you will have reabsorption occurring. So you're going to reabsorb water, depending on if the individual is dehydrated or not, ions, and all the organic nutrients. So you're reabsorbing, you're putting this back into the blood. It does not show here, but there is blood vessels that are all surrounding this purple colored tubule network. So from the glomeralis, you go to the proximal convoluted tubule. Here you're going to have reabsorption occurring. As the filtrate continues to move down the tubule, it is going to go through what's known as the loop of Henle. There's a change in pressure and concentration. So as it goes down through the descending limb, you also are going to be reabsorbing more water depending on the needs. It loops down the bottom and then goes up the ascending limb. Here on the ascending limb, you often have both sodium chloride ions being reabsorbed. once again, depending on the needs. Then it's going to go through, notice the tubule starts with its twists and turns again. This area is known as the distal convoluted tubule. Here you're secreting ions, acids, various drugs and toxins. Water and sodium ions reabsorption is going to depend once again on what are the needs right now. And finally, the filtrate's going to move down into the collecting duct. Now, you are going to have, if you notice at the very bottom, the papillary duct. Now in this collecting duct, this is where all of the final filtrate is being collected and goes towards the minor calyx. This essentially is the urine now that you have produced. And notice at the bottom there are connections there. You will have several different nephrons connecting to one collecting duct. So in a nutshell, this is the production of the neuron. So the activities of the nephron to produce the neuron, as I said, in the glomulus, you are filtering. Everything pretty much comes out of the blood, like I said, except for protein. If protein is in urine, that is indicative that there is some type of a problem with the glomulus, because protein should not be in the urine under normal conditions. And then in the both the proximal and distal convoluted tubules, that is where you have reabsorption and then secretion. So essentially what's happening is the blood's coming into the kidneys. It's like you're going, okay, let's take everything out of this. That's the filtration. Okay, now we need to put certain things back into the blood. That would be the reabsorption. And if there's any remaining stuff we don't want, or depending on certain conditions right now, the secretion is in those tubules, let's take out any other undesirable things for right now. And then you collect that fluid, the filtrate, which is the urine, into the collecting ducts, which drain into the papillary ducts. And I said several collecting ducts drain into the papillary ducts, which are then going to empty into, finally, the minor calyx first. So once again, this is just showing another diagram of this. Where is the glomulus and this whole nephron? Where is it located? Part of it is in the cortex, and those loops, like the loop of Henle and then the collecting ducts, those are actually embedded in the medulla portion of the kidney. On this histology slide, you can see the collecting ducts and the glomulus. Here's another increased magnification, and once again another view of it. So how is the blood supply going? Well, as the blood leaves the aorta, it's going to be moving down the descending aorta, branch off the renal artery, as you can see on the diagram, how that comes in through the hilum area. From the renal artery, you have branching to the segmental artery. Then from there, it further branches into the interlobal arteries. Interlobal arteries, notice, are going to be around each of the pyramids. Then you have the arcuate artery, which is starting now to branch along the top of the pyramids between the medulla and the cortex area. Then you have the cortical radiate artery, and finally that in part of the nephron itself, you now have that afferent arteriole, which comes in to the glomulus, which is where the capillary bed is. The blood leaves out the efferent arteriole to the peritibial capillaries and vasa recta. From there, those are going to drain into the cortical vein, the arcuate vein, interlobal vein, renal vein, and finally out to the inferior vena cava. The ureter is the tube that connects the kidney to the urinary bladder. And its whole purpose is to transport the urine that you just formed in the kidney, is to transport it down to the bladder where it's going to be stored. until you can release it. So each kidney has its own ureter. They both come down. This is a cross section of the ureter. And they will both drain into the urinary bladder, which is located in the pelvic cavity. It's basically a storage facility. Remember, the urinary bladder, if you remember from AMP1, is made of transitional epithelial cells, so it's able to stretch. It can increase the volume that it's capable of holding. So when it's empty, it's kind of a pyramid shape, but then it can stretch out to hold the urine when it's full. The rugaeus is fully similar to what you saw in the stomach, being able to increase the size when it stretches out. And the trigon area is the area where the two ureters do come in, as you can see at the bottom of the bladder, which is where they drain. And once again, cross section. The urethra is the muscular tube that passes from the urinary bladder to the outside of the body to allow you to empty the bladder. There are two sets of sphincters. There's an internal urethral sphincter, which is involuntary, and then the external urethral sphincter, which is voluntary, that allows you to control when to release the urine. And once again, this is showing the urethra and a histology slide of it. Once again, anything ending with itis is inflammation. So urethritis is inflammation of the urethra. This is much more common in females than in males. And the reason for that is because in the female, the urethra is much shorter than in males. So it's easier for them to contract urinary tract infections. Cystitis is inflammation of the bladder, and pylons is inflammation of the kidneys. One thing to help prevent any type of urinary tract infection is, especially for females, is to remember when they have a bowel movement is to wipe from front to back to try to prevent essentially cross-contamination.